objects. Up to this point in these videos on VB scripting, we've focused on the basic skills, statements, functions and loops that form the core skills you'll need to have to be successful in scripting. And truth be told, you're more than halfway there in knowing what you need to know about the scripting language. However, from this point onwards, we'll start getting into the skills you'll need to have in order to use objects in your scripts. And it's these objects that'll enable your scripts to be able to manipulate files, folders and drives, applications like IIS, Exchange, Active Directory, and things like that. And these will make your scripting abilities rocket far beyond just popping up a few simple message boxes. Now, an object is most often simply a DLL or Dynamic Link Library file that contains reusable code. If you check your own Windows system, in your Windows System 32 directory, you'll find literally hundreds of these DLLs already built into Windows. And if you check the applications on your hard disk, you'll probably find a lot more there as well, as most application vendors also use DLLs in their products. So these DLL files can be used in your scripts to do something. And of course the best news is that you hardly have to do anything to use their code in your scripts. So the first thing you need to do in order to use an object in your script is to instantiate it. Now this might sound like a difficult thing, especially if you've never heard of that word before, but it simply means load it into memory and execute it. And you can instantiate an object by using the createObject function. You'll then give it a prog ID, which VBScript uses to look up the DLL's name and location from the Windows registry, and this will return a reference to the object. Then we can use the set keyword to assign the new object to a variable, and this variable will then represent the object, and now you can work with the object through the variable you've just created. Now this all might sound difficult, but it's really easy, and you'll be using it in most of your scripts before you know it, and you probably won't even give it a second thought, as it will just become second nature. Now once you have an object loaded into memory, you can begin looking at the object's properties, and properties are kind of like chapters in a book. So think of a book about houses, and that'll be our object. Its properties might be a chapter about each room in the house, so the kitchen, the bedrooms, the bathroom, and so on. Now some of these properties of an object will be read-only, others write-only, and some of them will be both read and write. Now the properties of an object will be accessed by using a period, or a full stop if you like, after the object name and then specifying the property name. So in this case here, we'd need to set the object to our variable, which here I've simply called it object home, and make that equal to our object, which we would call using the createObject function, followed by the object of house, and then the property of kitchen. Now we used methods to make an object perform some sort of action. Now some methods require an input argument and others don't, and some methods return a value and others won't. Now those that return a value will need to have their input argument enclosed in parentheses, and those that don't return a value, you don't use parentheses. So it's rather simple. Now one of the most common objects you'll be using in your scripts is the file system object. This object allows you to interface with the file system of a local or remote computer, and it lets you read and write to the system drives, the files, folders, and text files. And since most of what you'll be using VBScript for will probably involve text files, this is going to be a frequently used object. Alright, in this example we're going to use the file system object to create a script that's going to create a new folder, and then it's going to copy the contents of our scripts directory, and that's the directory I've got here on my hard drive, which is holding all of my scripts here that we're using for the demonstration purposes of this video. We're going to copy the contents of that into the new folder that we're going to create. So the first thing we'll need to do up here is to declare the variables that we're going to need. So here you can see I've declared the file system object, a folder, a file, and a new folder variable. Now next, we've used set to assign the file system object to our variable, which we've given obviously a similar name of object file system object, and that makes things easy to identify later on. Now that we've got the file system object assigned to our object FSO variable, we can now use set again to assign the get folder method to a new variable that we've simply called object folder. Now this line will hold the folder that we plan on copying from, which you can see over here on the right is of course the scripts folder on the root of our C drive. Now down here we've used set again to assign the create folder method to a new variable we've called object new folder, and this line will create our new folder called test on the root of our C drive. And finally down the bottom here we've created a for each loop to copy each file from the scripts folder to the new test folder. So what we're really saying here is that for every file our loop finds in the folder C:\scripts, then copy that file down here to the test directory. And our loop's going to then continue for every single file it finds in the scripts folder until such time as there's no more files in that scripts folder, and then our script here will exit. Alright, well let's go and run our script. So we'll go to our command prompt here and we'll run our file, which is simply copy.vbs. Okay, it's complete. So if we now go and open up Windows Explorer, so we'll go and open up my computer and go to our C drive here. Now notice here that there is a directory called test, and if we go and open that, there's all of the files inside that have been copied by our script. Now there's a couple of things we do really need to look at regarding our script, so we'll go back to our scripting editor here. Now firstly, if our script doesn't find this destination directory here called test, it won't automatically be created. And that's why I added in this line of code to create that destination folder. Otherwise, this script would have failed. Now, the next thing to consider when writing this script is that if this destination folder here of test already does exist, then as it stands, this script will also fail. So let's test it just to make sure that I'm telling the truth here. So I'm going to go back to our Explorer, and I'm just going to select all of these files and I'm going to send them to the recycle bin there, and we'll go back and we'll run our script one more time. Alright, and as predicted, our script bombs out. It tells us that a file already exists, which is actually our test directory. And if we go back and check our test folder, you can see here, if I just hit F5 to refresh, you can see there's no files that are copied into it. Alright, well, let's go and take a look at a better way of performing the same task. So we'll come up here, I'll select copy2.vbs. Okay, so here we have another script which is simply a modified version of the last one. At the top you can see we still have the same variables listed, but on the second line here we've set our object new folder variable directly assigned to the test folder. Now the next line where we create our interface to the file system object is also unchanged, as is the next line where we set the source folder to our scripts directory. Now down here you can see the next line here is different. Here we've created an if-then statement that now checks to see if the target folder called test actually exists. If it does already exist, then we'll simply post back a message here telling us that the folder already exists. Now if it doesn't, then this else statement here is going to execute, and then what we'll do is we'll simply create the folder like we did in the previous script. Alright, well let's go and run this script. So we'll go back to our command prompt and we'll go and run copy2.vbs. Now this time we already have the test directory, which of course is empty, so our else statement should not execute, as the if portion of our statement, which checks to see if the target folder exists, should come back as true, or yes, that it does. So now we simply should be presented with a message telling us that our folder already exists, but the files should then be copied. So if we go to our test directory here, we can see all the files. So that's a much better script than the earlier one, as it offers a little more flexibility when situations occur that ordinarily stop our script from running, such as the target folder already being there. And that's a little lesson for you. When you create your scripts, or even before that, when you start planning your scripts, you should consider everything that can go wrong and add countermeasures to your scripts just in case those things come up. Now another thing for us to consider for this script is, what if some or all of the files already exist in the target folder? Perhaps you could use your new scripting skills to come up with a similar solution for that one. Now before we move on here, I do want to point out how to rename a file or folder using VBScript, since I do get asked this one a fair bit. So we'll come up here, I've got another script which I've called rename.vbs. Okay, and you can see this script here is pretty simple. In fact, I've only got 2 lines, and the first line you've already seen a couple of times now. And of course this line simply creates the variable that allows us to access the file system. So on the second line here, we've simply used the move folder function to rename the directory called test to a different name, which I've simply called renamed folder. And that's it really. If it's a file you wish to rename, you could simply change move folder to move file and you're done. It's really easy stuff. Alright, well, let's go and move on and take a look at another popular example, and that's working with text. Now, as we've already stated throughout these videos, text processing is one of the most important abilities of any scripting language, not just VBScript. You'll need to understand how to work with text files for many reasons. You might want to be able to search a text file for a particular string. You might want to be able to record data inside of text files or write data out to log files. And there's so many more examples. It'd be impossible to list all the uses. But trust me, you will need to know how to work with text if you want to be any good at scripting. Okay, now in this example here, we're going to build on what we already know and use VBScript to create a text file for us and simply write out the time and date to it. Now, if the text file already exists, we'll open it and then append the time and date to it. Okay, so up here on the first two lines of our script, we've declared our variables and set our variable log file to be a literal by directly assigning a value to it called logfile.text. Now, next we've created two constants, for writing equals 2 and for appending equals 8. Now, when you work with text files, you can work with them in certain states. You may wish to read the text file only, or you might want to write to it. Or you might want to simply add or append text to an existing file. Now, here we've created a constant that sets for writing equal to 2. 2 simply means that the file will be overwritten when we write to it, and that may or may not be what you want to do. Now, I've also defined another constant here that will append text to an existing file. Now, we don't have to create these constants at all. We could simply use the values of 2 and 8 in our script and remove these constants altogether. So why bother putting them in our script in the first place? Well, it makes our script easier to read. When looking down our script, it's certainly easier to decipher what for writing and for appending means than a bunch of numbers. And that's really the only reason that you do this here.